Nobody is worth putting on pedestals, and nobody is worth putting in pits, but everybody is worth putting in hearts. And that is the quote of the day. Welcome back to the Quote of the Day show. I'm your host, Sean Croxton of SeanCroxton.com. Thanks for tuning in. We got Dr. John Demartini back on the show today. But before we get to the doc, I have to say one thing. There are quite a few parents who have emailed me saying that they listen to the show with their kids in the car. This might not be the show for that. Dr. Demartini gets a little R-rated with the sex talk, and so I will leave it up to the parents. You have been warned. You have been notified. So if you want to go back to an old episode and play that one, go for it. Or you can just stay here. I really enjoyed this clip because I feel like a lot of relationships have gone awry because there was a lack of understanding of this topic. Have you ever met someone and you're completely head over heels for that person? They just really do it for you and you start dating. But what's important to them all of a sudden becomes important to you. What they like, you start to like. What they love, you start to love. What they want to do, you want to do, even though that stuff really isn't you. And then after a while, you're like, what's going on? Like, I want my life back. You know, what's the deal here? Why are we always doing what that person wants to do? Whatever happened to me and the things that I want to do? And you start to get a little resentful about that. And then once you get that resent going, then the whole relationship just all goes bad. And what happened there was a matter of values. You started to subordinate to somebody else's values instead of valuing your own. And so Dr. Demartini walks you through how this works in this episode. And so I hope you learn a lot. I hope you dig it. And I will see you on the other side.
The tendency is anytime you're doing something that's truly inspiring to you, that's living according to your highest values, you embrace challenge. You embrace the challenging component, the predator, the competitor. You activate it. Now, if you do not live according to your highest values and do not embrace challenge that inspires you, you will automatically attract challenge that doesn't. It's a Parkinson's law that goes like this. If you don't fill your day with things that inspire you, it will fill up with things that don't. If you don't fill your day with things that are high priority, it will fill up with things that are low priority distractions. If you don't plant flowers in the garden of your mind, it's going to fill up with weeds. The key is to identify what's truly most congruent, most inspiring, that you want to dedicate your life to, that gives you both support and challenge, that is inspiring to you, that's a challenge to conquer, and keep yourself on the edge and fill your day with that if you want to get the maximum adaptability out of the environment and be able to transform this so-called distress into eustress and actually maximally perform and achieve. Are you with me so far? Yeah. Now, if you have something support you, let's say you have a child and it has a mother, and the mother does and says, well, whatever you want, son. Whenever you want to do it, just let me know. I'll help you do it. Whatever you want, whenever you want, every time you want, just let me know. We'll just make sure it all happens for you. What happens to the child? It becomes a juvenilely dependent, spoiled little brat. Yes? How many met people like that? I was in London, speaking in London, and I did a consult on this day after my speaking. And I met with this gentleman who's a son of a very wealthy billionaire. I think they have $17 billion. And the son has never worked in his life and is basically just floundering and partying. And he was trying to figure out how to get focused and productive. And I told him, the only way you're going to be productive, I just told him blank, is for me to call your dad and tell him to cut you off. Does that make any sense? He said, I'm paying you for this? How many of you know that's truth? Because he has no drive, he has no ambition. He's just going to party animal. A playboy. Okay? I don't mind being a playboy for a couple hours, but not for a life. Now, but if you take that child and give it accountabilities, responsibilities, and challenge, what happens to the child? It becomes precociously independent. So I want you to get this. This is a really cool realization if you get this. Okay, so you have a hierarchy of values here. So you might want to imagine a ladder of values. Highest value, lowest value. And things support it or challenge it. Anytime something supports it, you tend to go into juvenile dependency. And anything that supports your values, you tend to put up on a pedestal. So watch carefully. How many have been infatuated with somebody before? You met somebody, you went, whoa, that's unbelievable, I got to have that. And you wanted to eat it. Yes? How many have been infatuated with somebody and wanted to eat them, and you studied mathematics and the number 69? Yes? These two girls are laughing. Okay. But would you agree that when you're infatuated with somebody, you have a tube that runs from your mouth to your other side? Okay? Whenever you're infatuated with somebody, it activates dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, and a whole bunch of other chemistries, depending on male and female, endorphins and kephalons, etc., and dandine. And when it does, it makes you addicted to them, bonded to them, and pleasure associated with them. When you do, you don't want to lose that. It's prey. It's the same chemical compounds that you get for addiction, food, sex, etc. The primordial emotions that are driven. This is the animal instinct. And you become an animal. How many of you are like an animal if you're highly infatuated? Yes? Now, when you do, it literally activates the sugar receptors, the salt receptors on your tongue to make you want to consume and eat. That's why you call the person, when you're infatuated with somebody, you call them honey, sweetheart, cupcake, candy, sweetie pie. Yes? Would you agree? And you want to eat them because you're thinking, cupcake. Okay? So what happens whenever they support your values, you tend to activate those chemistries. You tend to become addicted and bonded to it and pleasured. You fear the loss of it because you fear the loss of prey. This is built into your biochemistry. And when you do, you fear the loss of it and you're anxious and you become dependent on it and you become a juvenile dependent because you minimize yourself and put it up on a pedestal. Now, I know that everybody in here has had a moment when they've been infatuated with somebody, and when they've been infatuated, would you agree, you start sacrificing things that are important on your highest value to be with them? Yeah. Raise your hand if you know you've done that. The second you minimize yourself to that person that you infatuate with and want to eat them and consume them, you will stop doing things that's highest on your value and you'll move down your value list. And when you do, your fulfillment level goes down within yourself, and you literally start to have ingratitude to yourself, and you start doubting yourself, and you have uncertainties in yourself, and you tend to depend on them. Because you're too humble to admit what you see in them is inside you. You're thinking they have something that you don't. And so you're dependent on them. And you act like a child. How many have been infatuated and acted like a child? I watched an 82-year-old woman and an 84-year-old man who once were lovers, you might say, when they were in kindergarten. They were their childhood soulmates, right, in elementary school. They dissipated. They eventually went to high school, different places, college, different way. They got married, and they ended up, both their spouses died. They ended up getting back together at 82 and 4. Okay? They had a daughter who was 52, who was best friends with my wife at the time. And she said, I have moved out of the house. I was living with my mother. I'm no longer living there. It's disgusting. They're running around naked, acting like little kids. And they're in their 80s. Okay, how many are looking forward to this? Because they're both having endorphins and they act young, right? They're both infatuated with each other. So the second something that you perceive supports your values more than challenges it, and you get infatuated with it, you tend to activate the prey biochemistry, you tend to become dependent on it, but what happens is you become juvenilely dependent and you start sacrificing your highest values to be with them. Now, every time you do this, every time you sacrifice what's most important to you, that's highest on your values, to be with them, you start accumulating resentment. But why? Because you want to be loved and appreciated for who you are, which is your highest value. And you start resenting having to sacrifice to be with them. And after a while, this resentment starts to erode the infatuation, and it's designed to break the infatuation to get your life back. So after 3 or 4 months of this infatuation, you say, this isn't working for me. I want my life back. How many of you know what I'm talking about? And so you go back, break the infatuation, and try to level the playing field and realize they're not better or worse than you. They're equal to you, which you now start to have a loving relationship instead of a dopamine-addicted fantasy relationship. Yes? Now, while you're in the infatuation phase and you're minimizing yourself and you're too humble to admit what you see in them is inside you and you've got this dopamine fix and you want to eat them with a 69 position, when you're in this mode, okay, what you've just done is sacrificed your highest values. And when you do, your adaptability to change is now jeopardized because you fear the loss of them. And so if they left you and said, I'm leaving now, you're devastated. And some people that are highly addicted, highly bound, highly infatuated, highly pleasured over somebody, if they get dumped, they'll commit suicide. How many of you got what I'm saying? Because they're addicted to somebody. Or let's take the person out of the place, let's say a career, or anything that you're highly addicted to, if all of a sudden it's taken away from you, you can be in highly depressed, highly withdrawal mode. So anything that you perceive as support without a challenge, anything you become infatuated with or addicted to, anything that those chemical compounds get highly strong and you have a primordial attraction and impulse to, like an animal, you're vulnerable to. And it runs your life. Would you agree when you're infatuated with somebody, they occupy space and time in your mind and run you? Raise your hand if you've been infatuated and couldn't get them out of your mind. They're running your life. That is where you have the inability to adapt to a changing environment. Because if all of a sudden they left you, you're not able to adapt because you're highly polarized. Would you agree if you go into areas of the world where you have a tremendous amount of fundamental black and white thinking, where there's high, good, bad, right, wrong, black, white thinking, you have the least ability to adapt to changing environment and the most stagnation. Now let's go to the other side. What happens if somebody challenges you more than supports you? They go against your highest values. They're the predator. They challenge you. You got two activations, fight or flight response, and you want to get independent from them. And you become stronger and stronger and stronger because of the competition and challenge. So what happens, you become precociously independent. How many have been resentful to somebody and talked down to them? You should do this, you ought to do this, you're supposed to do this, and you start talking like an authority, like an adult around them. Well, but when you're infatuated, you talk, is that okay, honey? Because you're afraid of losing them. So what happens, you move into juvenile dependency when you get infatuated, but on the other side, you go to precocious independence. When you do, you move up your value list. That's why challengers increase the probability of you living authentically. How many got what I just said? So if you don't go after challenge, you'll attract challenges that don't inspire you. But if you go after challenges that inspire you, you will increase the probability of you living according to your highest value, not your lower values. Because you won't sacrifice yourself. You'll tackle yourself and take on yourself when you go through challenge. So the fastest way to be a leader and authentic is to tackle challenges that inspire you. Now, if all of a sudden something challenging comes along and the predator is very overwhelming to you and you resent it, would you agree if you resent somebody because of the challenge that they can occupy space and time in your mind? How many have been occupied by both? I've been highly resentful, so angry, so resentful, I could hardly sleep, I could hardly function, I couldn't be present in my work. I've been so infatuated, looking at a girlfriend one time, just staring at her picture, completely unfunctional. Yes? Anybody been there before? In my 20s, I had both of those experiences. Now that I'm 58, I know that nobody's worth putting on pedestals. And nobody's worth putting in pits. But everybody's worth putting in hearts.